Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to episode 14 of Ferg's Footy Fanfare. I'm Jay, and as usual, I'm here with Ned. How are you, mate?
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks, Jay. How are you, mate?
Yeah, good. It's trying to fill the gap with an uncharacteristic bye before the finals. Given this year and the unique circumstances, it's odd not having football around. So having over a whole week off is quite unique in its own rights. So we've decided that, we're going to come on air and we're going to talk about, a few things that have happened this week, including All Australian and as well as a few other debates that have been brought up regarding some teams and their finals aspirations.
Yeah, it's pretty strange, mate. You could have been hungover celebrating a St Kilda premiership, if it was a normal season.
Well, that's right. And I know the conditions down in Melbourne yesterday were pretty poor at stages. It tend to shower, but the showers were quite heavy. And a question that I haven't asked you is, there was a fair chance, and I think there is a fair chance that Richmond will make the grand final. So how do you think they would have fared in yesterday's conditions? You reckon that would have been an advantage for them?
They would have played right into their breadbasket. Yeah. That would have been absolute ideal. They love the wet weather because, the wet weather sort of it endorses the way that Richmond play, that just surge forward and, that's the best thing to do in wet weather, and they sort of just come together.
Yeah, I think a team, like Geelong has the quality to win the ball in the middle and really, just push it forward as well, just that bomb it long. But the way that they've played at times this year, they really desire that clean football. So I feel like they would have, potentially not been able to play their football they're most capable of. So I feel like Port Adelaide would have also fared pretty well with, similar conditions being wet because they're so hard in the midfield and able to get that contested ball.
Yeah, I think you're right there, and it would have been a bit hard for West Coast.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you can really see them starting to do that run. And in a lot of the previous weeks, they haven't been attacking anywhere near as much as they'd like, I feel. They've been doing a lot of counter, stuff on the counter, quick movement. So, yeah, I feel like that would have impacted them. I can't remember what night. Was it Wednesday night or Thursday night where they had the All Australian and the awards?
I think it was Thursday.
Yeah. So you had Caleb Sarong as a rising star. How did you, was that expected from you?
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, that was, he's been pretty consistent Fremantle this year. He was really the only logical selection for mine. Noah Anderson was good in patches. I felt that he started to build a bit towards the end of the season. There were a few other excitement packages, obviously, like Rankin and Matt Rowell, obviously. But obviously Rowell, had he played a full season, he probably would have won it. But no, good on Sarong.
Yeah. And like you said, he just started playing at that quality that Anderson built up to, but he was playing that way from about round 6 onwards. Yeah. So, I think that he was a deserving winner of it, and big things to come for him. And it just goes to show, Fremantle. We spoke about it last episode. Fremantle look like they're on the right track and really developing some of their youngsters.
Yeah, they are looking the goods. Just need to draft well again and maybe try and, get some experience in the off season and, really start building towards what could be a potential finals campaign, and then also potential top 4 campaign if they're able to hold on to all these good young players.
Yeah. So we had the All Australian. I'm sure to everyone in the footy circle, it was fairly contentious, and is the main subject of my segment. You can't be doing that. So I know last episode I specifically targeted one person, which is a bit harsh. So this time I've decided to really spread it out, and I think I have about 9 people to target this time. So I've got Gil McLachlan, Kevin Bartlett, Luke Darcy, Steve Hocking, Glenn Jakovich, Chris Johnson, Cameron Ling, Matthew Richardson, and Warren Treadray. Now they are the players that, they are the people that picked the All Australian team. And for most parts, I think that there's a lot of value for what they've picked, and correct definitely in some instances. But what you can't be doing is you can't be putting players based on reputation in the All Australian team when they haven't had their best season and people have played better than them. It's that simple. It's the All Australian. It's you're playing your best position. Bontempelli is not on the half forward flank. He's not coming off half forward. He's winning the ball in the middle. He's their captain. That's what he does. The same, Martin, I know that he spent more time forward this year, but it's similar. He does his best work when he's in the midfield, I feel, and the same with Dangerfield as well. So I really don't think that you can be doing that and creating essentially a super coach team with these big names that, sure, they have the X factor, and when they're playing their best football, they're better than a Menegola or a Gunston or a Guthrie. But just because they haven't done it on a consistent basis this year, they still don't get to go in because of their name. So you can't be doing that. Not on.
Fair enough. This probably been the most controversial All-Australian team that I can remember. And what's your thought of the selection of the captaincy? Was it the right call?
Sorry, who was the captain again? It was
Patrick Dangerfield.
Yeah. I think it's right in the sense that, he's the leader of the AFL Players Association and all that. He seems to be, one of the main people that's, focused around when any player issues are spoken about. But, as we'll get to in a second, I think it's contentious that he's even in the All-Australian team in the first place. So, the contentious All-Australian team has forced us to make our own All-Australian teams based on the top 40 that was selected and shortlisted. We've gone and made our own All-Australian 22. So did you want to start, Ned, with your backline?
Yes, so my backline starting from the fullbacks. Luke Ryan from Fremantle, Harris Andrews from Brisbane, and then Dylan Grimes from Richmond. I'll do my halfbacks. So Nick Floston from Richmond, Jacob Wiedering from Carlton. Is Jacob Wiedering?
Yep.
Yeah, Jacob Wiedering from Carlton, and Nick Haynes from the Giants.
No, so I think, potentially the most outspoken ones in that backline are Brad Shepherd and Luke Ryan. Both, obviously to make the 40, they've had very good seasons, but, considering some of the other players that have missed out, I feel like they were better performing. But it's also hard, I know for a fact that I really struggle to get a gauge on some of the interstate players, especially like Darcy Byrne-Jones, for example. I know, for example, he played really well when St Kilda played them. I've seen him in dribs and drabs of other games, but it's hard to continually focus on them and hear their name repetitively.
All right, so what's your back line?
Well, I've made two changes. In saying that, I've dropped Brad Shepherd and Luke Ryan. So I've got in my fullbacks, I've got Wiedering, Harris Andrews, and Byrne-Jones. And then off the halfback, I've got Haynes, Darcy Moore, and Maynard from Collingwood as well. So he slips in. Though he's had a great season. I think he's a pretty good player. Pretty damaging coming off the halfback line, but he also holds his forward accountable when the ball's going forward.
He didn't hold Willie Rioli accountable, that was for sure.
Ah, jeez. They shoved. So, centre. So this will be interesting to see with so many names. I haven't had a real look at yours, so it'll be interesting to see who you've come up with.
Yeah, so my centre line, Marcus Bontempelli, who is my vice captain, which I think it sort of makes sense because he's, giving him a vice captaincy because he is captain of his side. Would I say he's the best captain in the league? Probably not. But he does show good leadership qualities. And then Travis Boak from Port, who I have as my captain, obviously a former captain of Port. very experienced head. And then Patrick Dangerfield on the other wing.
Yeah, right. So you've gone Danger into the wing position. That's right. Was he?
Yeah.
Where was he originally? He was also on the. Yeah, he was on the half forward line. So
I think you know, he's got a real strong clearance game, Paddy Dangerfield. So, you know, I don't think he's as dangerous as a Fife or a Martin when he goes forward, because I think his most dangerous asset that he has is his quick running ability and able to, you know, really get the ball into the forward line quickly and get good purchase on his kicks.
Yeah. Yeah. So for my center line, I've included Menegola, and that's alongside Neil, and Guthrie has kept his spot as well. Purely based on form this year, Menegola, you know, it's interesting. I did a comparison with him and McRae, you know, both similar type players, but it ends up being that although McRae averages more disposals and slightly more effective by foot, Menegola has a lot more of an attacking presence and is able to get down and kick goals. He's kicked 13 this year compared to McRae's 3. So I think that he's had a good enough season to earn that spot on the wing.
Yeah. Fair enough. So do me forward line. I think this will be a bit more music to your ears. So half forward, Tom Papley, Charlie Dixon, and Christian Petrarca. Full forwards, Dan Butler, Tomahawk, and Dustin Martin.
Yeah. No, it's yeah. I mean, it's a good forward line, and you know, I completely understand where you're coming from with Dustin Martin, because he is so dynamic and electric when he's up forward as well. Very difficult to get a matchup on him.
Yeah, I think he's kicked 16 goals or 15 goals this year, something like that.
Correct, 15.
So I think getting purchased in a shorter season from a 50-50 sort of part-time forward. And
you got to remember he's up alongside Lynch and Riewoldt as well. So, you know, often he's definitely not the first target to go to, and he hasn't been kept one-on-one deep as much this season. So still had a good effort. On my half forward line, I've got Petrarca, Charlie Dixon, and I've put in Jack Gunston, which is, you know, if it's slightly controversial, I'm understanding of that, but given that the amount of forwards that were actually picked in the top 40, there wasn't a real batch to choose from. So I've gone with Gunston on the mere premise that, you know, the midfielders belong in the midfield in this sense.
Yeah.
And
it's pretty crazy. Sorry to interrupt you, but
no, you're right.
I reckon this year has been one of the years where the squad of 40 has probably been made up with more defenders than forwards. And we've always gone on about how defenders don't get that much recognition. But you only had to see from the side who missed out on the the official side. But then you look at us, you know, with our sides that we're doing now, and, you know, and I know when I was doing mine, I still thought there was probably about 3 or 4 players that I could have easily chucked in there, and I thought they were a bit stiff.
Yeah, spot on. You know, like, you know, names like Taberner and all that come pop up that have had really good seasons. You know, probably a tad unfortunate to, as well as the other names, you know, that were publicised so much that was stiff to make the 40. You know, Stephen May and stuff like that. In my full forward line, I've got Tom Papley, Hawkins, and then Butler as well. So I think that out of the 3 small forwards in there with Butler, Papley, and Ryan, I feel like Ryan would have been my last choice. So it was interesting to see that he was the first picked. I think it's more, you know, it's just that attention that the media receives off him. You know, he's becoming a bit of a cult hero and a real focal point for media.
Okay, so I'll go through my followers and my interchange. So my followers are Nick Nat, Lockie Neal, and the Man of Steel. And then my interchange, Darcy Byrne-Jones, Taylor Adams, Liam Ryan, and Gawn. So I sort of tried with my bench to do sort of one from sort of each line.
So you went Gorn, did you? Because we were having discussions over the two ruckmen.
Yeah, I was thinking about it, but I thought if I was really going to build a side, and I think over the last few years, you've seen, the premiership sides have two ruckmen. I think two ruckmen is probably going to be the way forward.
Well, alongside with that, it's been really well publicised that Nick Nat struggles to get a significant amount of game time. He really needs someone to go alongside with him. So it's probably a good call in the end. My followers, I've got Nick Nat, I've got Boak, who's my captain as well. And I've also managed to put Jack Steele up in there as well. And I've just managed to do that by putting Petrarca into the half forward line. I feel like he's, pretty dangerous up there. Interchange, I've got Taylor Adams, I've got McRae, I've got Bontempelli, and I've also got Grimes, who made his way in. So definitely, partly for his theatrics as well and his diving tendencies. Going to have to work on that. All Australians shouldn't be doing that, mate.
That's right, mate. Mate, I'd do a lot of things for a premiership medal, and I think I'd definitely dive for a premiership medal.
That's a good point.
All right, so that's our All-Australian side's done. So I've written up a few topics, and so have you yourself, about, leading up to the finals. Obviously, we will dissect the 4 games later on in the week, but we'll just probably talk about headlines and, just a few questions that seem to always get thrown around this time, and then things relevant to some of the teams that will be playing.
Yeah, I think the first place that we should start, is two what I think will be significant players in the final, that being West Coast and Richmond. I think they're going to struggle to figure their starting 18. They got some big names coming in. So how, you being the Richmond man, of course, how do you think they're going to cope with that, and what changes do you see them making?
Yeah, so just being in, a lot of Facebook groups and all that amongst other supporters. Obviously, we'll have 3 players coming back in who I think are, you'd say a walk-up starters in Dion Prestia, best and fairest winner last year, Tom Lynch, and Shai Bolton, who I think will take out our best and fairest this year. It'll be, and all this discussion's been, who goes out, because obviously last week against Adelaide, the inclusion of Edwards and Asprey. So the Adelaide game, a few players are playing, for their finals. Probably the obvious ones for mine would be Jack Ross, potentially a Castagna or a Rioli comes out, just because I think Jake Hartz has been our best small forward all year. So that's probably a role that Bolton would come back into, being a small forward.
So you think with Prestia and Edwards back here, you think that Bolton will be sent back to the forward line more so than that extra midfield time?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Edwards, you can sort of play anywhere. So, but he's good up and around the contests. And then Lynch, you probably see someone like Caddy or Mubby or Chol missing out.
Yeah, I think, for a lot of teams, this pre-finals bye is going to be a real advantage. I know that for the St Kilda Western Bulldogs game, for example, Zach Jones is almost a certain starter for St Kilda, which I think is necessary for him, for St Kilda to be any chance. But then you look at the Western Bulldogs as well, and, there's question marks over Norton and Mitch Wallace. And you'd think if that was played this weekend, then there wouldn't have been any chance. So it ends up being quite helpful, and considering the amount of how quickly this season has gone and the shortness of breaks between games, it's a good just way to break it up.
Mm,
It's interesting to see West Coast. They've got Jamie Cripps estimated to be back. They've got Lewis Jetta, McGovern. He's going to have a test and see whether he's right, as well as Jack Redden. So they're really,
yeah.
if they end up getting 4 or 5 players back, I think that they're almost good enough in their current team and where they're playing to beat Collingwood without those players. But, if they can get them in, that would be
That's obviously
optimal.
going to do you more good than bad.
Exactly right. And you've got Josh Kennedy as well, who's a bit of a 50-50. I think he did his ankle in the last round.
Obviously, Yo won't be coming back.
Yeah.
But like what you said, West Coast, they're pretty well placed, and obviously getting a home final, will be beneficial. Extremely, like, best home ground advantage really in the comp. But then going forward, they're either going to be playing Port Adelaide in Adelaide or Geelong over in I'd say at the Gabba. I'd probably say they'd nominate the Gabba.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Just before we get to that and leading into the playing in West Coast and playing at, arguably the place that has the biggest home advantage, we had Kane Corns say today or earlier yesterday that Collingwood are just making up the numbers. So do you agree with that statement?
I don't think so. I think what we saw Collingwood dish up against Port Adelaide, they weren't terrible. Port, being the best side in the comp all year. No, I think that's a pretty ludicrous statement from Kane Corns, but we've come to expect that. I really think if Collingwood are somehow able to beat West Coast, I reckon they could probably knock out Geelong and possibly even have another crack at Port, with a bit of fire in the belly from, the game that they just played. So I don't think they'll be making up the numbers. They're a quality side. They made a grand final a couple of years ago and they made a preliminary final last year. And you don't do that from a fluke or not being a good team.
Well, yeah, I think given the way that all of these teams in the 8 performed in their last rounds, I don't think teams just make up numbers.
Nah.
Particularly I was very surprised with the effort that Collingwood put in against Port Adelaide. I think that went as well as they could have expected it to have gone.
Yeah.
But still, I think the odds are heavily stacked against them, and it's going to be a tremendous effort if they do manage to get up against West Coast. But to say that it's over before it's even started is quite silly by Kane Corns. And as you said, what else are we to expect from him other than ludicrous statements, really?
Yeah. So, our great mate Tyler, his side Port probably right in the box seat for a third grand final, two home finals, and obviously Thursday night they can dictate if it's going to be a home semi-final or a home prelim final.
Yeah, well, I mean, they just keep on giving, and I'm definitely one that's underestimated them this year and their ability to just keep getting the wins, being in first place the entire season. And it really is it's in their own hands. It's going to be a great game on Thursday night. I think they'll come in favourites, but we'll talk about that more tomorrow and what they need to do. But even then, if you were to look at it in terms of favourites winning, they'll more than likely come up against Brisbane, I suppose, in a home prelim. And I can't, with Brisbane's current issues, I'd struggle to see them winning. So I think that, Port Adelaide and Richmond are probably the 2 teams to beat at the moment. I think if Geelong manages to get the win on Thursday, then that shifts dramatically and changes everything around it. But I think it's pretty hard to look past Port Adelaide and or Richmond at the moment.
So Port, if they are to beat Geelong, they will have a home final against either Richmond, Brisbane, Bulldogs, or St Kilda.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think playing either of those sides at home, you'd back them in to do the job.
St Kilda beat them in Adelaide, so Shout out Tyler on that one, mate. But no, that's right. But the way that they're playing this year, and they've been so consistent, you'd be a pretty risky individual to try and bet against them.
Yeah, that's right. So, um, you know, Mitch Robinson has been pretty vocal this year, and his Brisbane Mob had a good season last season. They've backed it up again, having a good season. Obviously, there's going to be fire in the belly from the straight sets exit from 2 home finals. So, in my opinion, and also with Brisbane being on the receiving end of the longest current losing streak against another side, it's their best time to right a horrible wrong, I reckon, being coming up against Richmond, in which Richmond are red-hot favourites to get the job done.
That's it. It's a kind of a different perspective that you've brought on it, Ned, considering that you're so pro-Richmond and anti-Brisbane. It's good to see it from another lens. But you're exactly right. If there's ever a chance to do it, I don't know whether it's sitting in the back of their heads, their performance last year to go out in straight sets at home. But, to be undefeated this year at the Gabba, you'd like to think that would solidify in themselves some confidence of them being able to get the job done. But yeah, wait, did you guys play them at the Gabba or was that at Metricon?
This year, Metricon.
Yeah. So, that's something that they're going to have in the back of their heads. They can't beat you guys. And I think that would bring a lot of confidence to Richmond and their players and their whole group. They go in knowing that. And as long as they bring the right intensity and attitude, which they're a very professional side, this isn't their first rodeo. They've done this many a time before and they're attempting to create a dynasty. So, I think it really is the right time to patch up the mistakes they've made in years gone by for Brisbane. Absolutely.
Yeah. And obviously, last year they played back-to-back games against Richmond. Obviously, the last round of the season.
That's right. Yeah.
And then obviously the second qualifying final, and they were 2 very ordinary performances, 2 very contrasting performances as well last year. Richmond really got the jump on them. We went to that game and Richmond had the jump on them, and I think we're about 5 goals up at halftime, and Brisbane were able to claw their way back into it, but it was a bit of too little too late. And then 2 weeks later in the qualifying final, Brisbane really got the jump and Richmond really had to claw their way back into it. And then just recently this season, they really shot themselves in the foot with terrible kicking. So
that's something that's become a bit of a feature, not only in their past 2 games against Richmond this whole season, is their inaccuracy in front of goal. I think that'll be significant if they can get the score on the board early on. Similar to that qualifying final last season, I think if you'd switched around the goals and behinds column, I think that with that would have come a lot more confidence that they'll get in the job done. Might have been able to push on with it. So,
they're really going to have to find that way of being able to be more accurate in front of goals. Now that might have to be in a way that they maybe have to try and give themselves better quality shots, because I've seen a few of their games and their quality of shots aren't fantastic, and obviously you're not going to be very accurate when you're having to kick them, from the boundary, like 40 out on the boundary or right in the pockets. Whereas, when you look at St Kilda earlier on in the year, what Richmond have done over the last few years and Port Adelaide have done this year, getting shots, getting the ball out the back, having shots, 20 out directly in front. I still think that scoring efficiency is the most important stat in football, because, you only win on the scoreboard.
That's it. Got to kick the winning score.
So then we move into the next column. Can Collingwood or West Coast... Now, this could be quite a good game. and two very capable sides. Do they have the potential to cause any chaos? Obviously, the winner out of that game will play the loser out of Port Adelaide and Geelong. Could either of those sides set the loser of that side packing?
I think if West Coast make it through, there's definitely a case. And we spoke previously about the number of wins that they've got coming. And then you start looking at a very similar list that they've had in the past 2 seasons where they've been quite successful. Do I think that they're good enough to get, if both teams are playing their best football, I'd still think that neither Port Adelaide or Geelong will go out in straight sets. I think this year, unlike some years of the past where form has been a real indicator at the end of the year, I think the top 8 that's set out in, you'd have your power rankings almost the same. So I'd probably chuck Richmond ahead of Brisbane in terms of power rankings, but it's all very similar. But it would be a great semi-final regardless of who is, and that's something that I think is also happened in this final series. I think that all the games are going to be really close. I remember last year was last year the year with West Coast and Essendon in the qualifying final?
Yeah.
So
and West Coast pantsed them, didn't they?
That's right. You went into it knowing before the game had started.
Yeah.
And this year's 8th place, Collingwood, I think they're a far better team than what Essendon were last year.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So I think the top 8 is of a really good caliber this season. I expect all of the first week of finals to be tight encounters.
Yeah. So then moving on to the other elimination final. Can you see the Bulldogs or the Saints being able to get past Richmond or Brisbane? Obviously, your Saints did a job on my mob earlier in the year. So if St Kilda win and Richmond lose, there could be, a bit of confidence there from St Kilda knowing that they've done it before.
Yeah, it's going to be a bit awkward on the bloody podcast if that's the case.
Yeah.
Look, personally, I'm hoping that Richmond get the job done against Brisbane. I'd much rather play Brisbane in a semi-final than Richmond. I feel like when we played you guys, you weren't in bad form, but you weren't in the form that you're in now. And I think, if you ask Bulldogs fans, they probably want to come up against Brisbane. But the truth remains that if you want to win a premiership, you've got to beat any team in the finals at any time.
Yeah, so right. Obviously you can always get a bit of luck, but you can't be banking on luck to win a premiership.
No, that's it. Look, I think that St Kilda or Western Bulldogs, for that matter, are far more likely to make a prelim if Richmond win the first qualifying final.
All right.
So, yeah. Your thoughts?
Yeah, anyone's beatable. We've seen that over the last few years. So, but I think there's potential in St Kilda. Obviously, a great start to the year. Bulldogs probably haven't really hit the mark. Probably over the last 2 seasons, they just haven't been about where they could potentially be. But obviously, you've only got to look back, 4 years ago, what they were able to do. So anything's possible. Anyone's beatable.
Excellent summation. Spoken like a true professional.
And then this one, I reckon you're probably going to disagree with me on this. I've been very strong on this since the inception because I think it puts top 4 sides at a disadvantage. And that's the pre-finals bye. Now, it's probably a bit easier to come from my perspective about that I don't like it because obviously my team has won 3 of the last 3 qualifying finals in a row to have a week off going into a prelim. And I feel that it's just not a great thing for form. And I think there should be a bit more incentive for top four sides. And I think this was Richmond, this didn't help Richmond at all in 2018, in which things came unstuck in the preliminary final against Collingwood, is that you play 2 games of football in a month. So it's hard to find any sort of consistent form. So for mine, I'm not a fan of the pre-finals bye. I think it just I'm all like, yeah, I understand people want things even and all that, and it's probably going to help sides out, with injury returns. But I think you still have to be able to give an incentive to teams that finish in the top 4.
Yeah, look, to a certain extent, I agree with you. In theory, I think it's an excellent idea. You allow everyone to freshen up and all that. But then you have to start looking at particular circumstances. And you're right, top 4 teams, if they're winning, they're playing 2 games in a month and they lose any form of continuity. I remember it being quite contentious in 2016 because the Dogs got about 4 or 5 players back because of the pre-finals bye. And essentially, they're going to be facing a similar thing this year. They're going to get a few players back in as the West Coast. So I think for that reason, it kind of disrupts the current flow of things and allows teams that, look like they're out of it to come back in, which you can argue is good or you can argue is bad. You can argue that it's bad because, it's not basing it on the run-in at the end of the home and away season. Or you can say it's good because they're going to have their best team back and it should be best team again, someone's best 22 against another's best 22. So I think it's good in theory, but when it gets, when you have these things come up that really shift it, I think that's when it becomes an issue. So I do sympathize for, the teams that win, because I'm sure that, especially in 2020, when you've been playing games so regularly, if you end up playing 2 games of football within a month, it's going to feel like you're in a completely different season, different year.
Yeah, that's right.
And then you have, sorry, you go.
No, you go.
Yes, and then on other, you look at the other end of the spectrum, and you're going to have teams that are going to be able to get their full list back and going to be ready to go for finals. So I guess it just depends who, where your team is, and I know from a neutral standpoint, I think you could argue either way, really.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there is advantages and disadvantages to it, but yeah, I'm probably coming more from a top 4 perspective, and I only say that because I think, everyone aims to finish top 4 because, the incentive that you get of having the week off, which I think I just think that, you finish top 4, you should be given a bit more of an advantage. And I think that just this bye just gives the top 4 a disadvantage.
It would be a very interesting question to ask, current players or former players that have been introduced to the pre-finals bye, if they have suffered from the lack of normality in playing 2 games in a month when they have been in the top 4. So to get a gauge off them is probably the best way to decide whether the pre-finals bye is appropriate or not.
Yeah. So just drawing our attention off football for a minute, I'd just like to inform you that your mate Cam Ward has actually picked Scott McLaughlin off the start line in the race at Taylor Bennett, is currently in the lead.
Good on him. Hey, superstar. He's going to be the next big thing.
Best since sliced bread, he reckons.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, in the Bay Monster Energy car. Can't go wrong.
That is a good looking rig.
Yeah, absolutely. That black and green. Too bad, one of the very best colour schemes, I reckon. That and red, white, and black.
Gee whiz.
It's a quick plug.
Yeah. Anyway, so I'm just going to fire this question at you. It's a yes or no question. We did touch base on it last week. Should Geelong be concerned coming up against Port, playing over in Adelaide, and their performance against Sydney was quite lackluster? If you were in the Geelong camp, would you have some feels of doubt in the back of your mind, or would you be somewhat concerned? I thought Port played a very good game against Collingwood, and obviously having to go over there and the crowd, we know what the crowd's going to be like. It's going to be very one-sided. Is there going to be traces of doubt in the back of your mind if you're, an assistant coach or a player, or Chris Scott?
I think they'll be cautious, that they'll know that they're coming up against the best team all season. I have done a bit of research on this, and there seems to be a lot of not confusion, a lot of arguing over who's going to get the spot over Atkins or Jack Stephen. That seems to be the biggest, the spot that needs to be filled. And the argument's sake is that Atkins is more defensive and Jack Stephen's more attacking. So they're pretty solid in the attacking. To answer your question in short, I don't think they'll be worried. I think they'll be aware that they need to play a lot better than they did against Sydney, or else it's going to be a big loss. But I don't think they'll play as badly as they did against Sydney. I think that, as I said last week, Sydney, were playing very attacking. I don't think Port Adelaide will play a similar brand of footy to that. So I think it'll be a really good game. I think both teams will back themselves in to get the win and play their style of footy, and it'll be really interesting to see who comes out on top. But you're right, the hostile crowd will have some impact, absolutely.
Yeah, if Port are able to, chuck on 2 or 3 early ones, it's not gonna make life very fun for that mob.
That's it. Plus, in excess at the start of the game always gets the bloody opposition nervous.
Yeah, never tear our tarps. So I know before, when we chatted just before we started recording, I didn't really have anything laid out for Ned's Nuggets of Knowledge. I actually did have something that I did think about. I think I saw it yesterday on Facebook. And once again, it's going to be relevant to my side. So this will be so Richmond have finished top 4 for the last 4 consecutive years, and this is the first time that has been achieved since 1975, back in the Hayfie days.
For Richmond as a club?
Yeah, for Richmond, yeah, as a club.
Out. Well, that's, I mean, it's a long, long time, but you think about, there wouldn't be too many clubs that have also done that, top 4 for 4 consecutive years. So,
yeah, Geelong would have done it.
I'm sure Geelong and maybe Hawthorn back in their heyday would have.
Yeah.
Oh, I guess you would have had
Brisbane. Port Adelaide would have done it 3 years. I know they won minor premierships 3 years in a row.
See, I think when St Kilda were getting around playing really good footy, they would have only done 2008, 2009, 2010. 2011, they went out in elimination final. So,
yeah, it'd be a pretty hard feat. But you obviously nowadays you see teams have bursts. They do it in patches. Like you had the Saints. When they made those 2 grand finals, you had Brisbane. Then you had the West Coast Sydney, Geelong, and then also Collingwood had a little patch there. Sydney, had a patch for a few years and made a few grand finals. Obviously, Hawthorn.
I always wonder what approach you'd take if you're a list manager or a big, a big figure in a club, whether you try that consistently up the top as Geelong's done. I know they've had some things fall their ways in people wanting to come back home, or whether, you hit the top, go right down, back to the draft, rebuild, and then you give it another crack in 5-10 years' time.
I think it'd be based on which club you're at. I think if you're at one of the big 4 Melbourne clubs, or you're at Adelaide or West Coast or possibly Sydney, being in those biggest sides and all that, you probably just want sustained success. Like Geelong, it might not guarantee you a premiership, but that you're going to be, you're going to be making prelims, making semi-finals, consistently.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're like, say, someone like a St Kilda or a North Melbourne, and obviously like Melbourne, sides that are, in a bit of a premiership slump, like, haven't tasted success in a long time, you're probably just going to be going all out for just that one, and then obviously see what comes out of that.
Well, I often feel that if you go for that continued success, you leave yourself very precariously placed if you're relying on picking people up. And we've seen the issue with that. You know, we've got Essendon, who seem to be in that slump now where they just find themselves middle of the road. And, you know, they can't really go back to the draft now. They've just got to try and pick players up as they go along, unless they're going to call that all off and start from scratch. So it's a very good conundrum to try and figure out. All right, so that'll do us for tonight, Nettie.
Yeah, that'll do. That'll do, Donkey.
That'll do. Beautiful. Well, that was the end of episode 14. As we said, we'll probably upload something just prior to the first qualifying final on Thursday. And that'll just pretty much be an insight into all of the games. It'll include our tips. And I'm looking forward to finals football. It's going to be a cracking first week. It's good to have it back.
It's going to be good. A last bit of Ned's nuggets of knowledge. If Scott McLaughlin is able to pip Jamie Whincup and finish in front of him, Scott McLaughlin will become the first ever driver in the Blue Oval to win 3 consecutive Drivers' Championships.
Jeez. Far out. I'm going off Ferg's footy fan, but that's pretty amazing considering, you know, how long it's all been around for. All right. Thank you, everyone. And on that note, we'll see you later.
See yous.